Hello, welcome to LifeChangers, a program designed to give solutions to the problems of daily living. Today we'll be talking about relationship issues. I have with me three of my graduate students who are also teachers, Leon, Angeline, and Lisa. As an icebreaker, I have asked them to bring a quote that they can discuss. Lisa, would you please start?
Sure. If we remain nonviolent, hatred will die as everything does from disuse. This quote was given to us by Gandhi. I think it's important to realize that you can have a hate or you can have feelings of disgust and not be nonviolent.
Yes.
As Gandhi says, that it would die eventually. I think conflict is healthy in our lives. I don't think anybody can go through their entire life without any kind of conflict.
That's true.
But it's how you deal with that conflict.
Right.
And it would be better to deal with the conflict in a non-violent way as opposed to in a violent manner.
That's true. Gandhi also talked about two types of violence. He talked about active violence, where people take their anger and their hatred onto other people. That's why we have wars and a lot of killings. But then he also talked about passive violence, where we hold in violence within us, and then we take that out through subtle means. So there are two types of violence. So you're also talking about the second type of violence. And what happens is when people are passive, a lot of times they hold in their feelings for too long, and then when they cannot hold it anymore, they act out. And sometimes that can be even more dangerous, where they become very passive-aggressive. What is your quote?
My quote is by Mother Teresa, and she says, "It is by forgiving that one is forgiven." And I think that as humans, we have to remember that we all make mistakes.
That's right.
And whether it's a mistake that we make, we have to learn to forgive ourselves, and we're going to expect other people to forgive us. And in the same way, if someone acts, in a certain behavior against us, or someone loses our trust, or we lose someone else's trust, we have to learn to forgive them as well. Because if we don't, we're going to lose out on a relationship, whether it's with another person of the opposite sex or it's a friendship. Everything is affected by being able to forgive, because we're humans. We're all going to make mistakes, and at some point, in the same way that we're going to expect to be forgiven, we have to learn how to forgive others as much. As hard as it is to accept it, we have to learn how to forgive.
That is true. That is true. Let me ask you, how would you define forgiveness? What is forgiveness?
When you let go of those feelings, you don't necessarily have to forget what happened, but letting go of the feelings of hatred, and that way, you feel peaceful inside.
Excellent. So that is just letting it go, right? And not holding back, but just letting it go. Yeah. Great thought.
I think it's important what Leanne said about not forgetting, because when you forget things, you won't grow, because everything that happens in your life is for a purpose, and if you forget the things that have happened to you, then you can't learn and grow from those experiences.
That's true. Sometimes people say to forgive is to forget, but I disagree, because I think when you're trying to forget, you're trying to remember. So in that conscious effort to forget, you're only trying to remember even more. So we don't really have to forget. President John F. Kennedy said, forgive your enemies, but don't forget their names. So I think, like you said, there are things that we learn from life's experiences when we do have to forgive people, but we may have to remember what happened for growth, and so that we won't make those mistakes again in the future, right? Okay.
And I was just going to say, in truly forgiving that person too, you kind of have to, when you let go of it, of those negative feelings, don't always bring up what it is that happened, because you're just going to keep reliving the same incident over and over again.
That's a good point. I mean, once you say sorry, or once you forgive, I think that should never come back.
Right.
So in that way, you put that behind. You let it go, and don't bring that back. In relationships, a lot of times that happens. You forgive, or the other person says, "I'm sorry," and then at that point, you did forgive that person, but you bring that up again.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. My definition for forgiveness is denying your right to punish the person who wronged against you. So it's really, I mean, there are people who have done things against us, you know. I think when you don't act on it, when you don't punish that person, that is your way of forgiving that person too.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does, and that's part of what you were saying is that you can't come back to that person time after time and say, remember when you did this.
Yes,
Right.
that's true.
You don't, once you forgive them, you don't have the right to do that anymore. You forgave them. Everybody makes mistakes, and it's not that you have to forget,
Right.
but it shouldn't be used as ammunition against that person whenever you feel at a low point in that particular relationship.
Excellent. Leon, what's yours?
My quote is by Albert Schweitzer, and it states, "Constant kindness can accomplish much. As the sun makes ice melt, kindness causes misunderstandings, mistrust, and hostility to evaporate." And I truly believe that in any situation that you may be in, whenever you have a conflict, you just have to be kind. Kill people with kindness. I've experienced that it works no matter what they're saying to you. If you react in a kind manner, they don't have grounds to be hostile to you.
Mm-hmm.
They may say what they have to say, but I think at a certain point they'll realize, well, this person is being nice, so what choice do I have but to be nice?
I like that. I like what you said. I think kindness, in other words, is really showing your love to somebody who least deserves it.
Right.
Make sense?
Yes.
And I think they notice it as well. Like if they're just coming at you with evilness, evil, and you don't break down to it, then they're going to go somewhere else and say, well, I can't get to her, so let me just go. And they're frustrated more than anything.
And it catches them off guard.
Right.
I mean,
That's
because if they're part of, I feel like when people are rude or mean, they expect, you know, your reaction to be the same back to them. And when you're not rude or mean back to them and you're kind to them, kind of catches them off guard. Like, why are they being so nice to me? You know?
That's true. That's true.
And you condition people to react a certain way to you. So if you're nice,
that is true. That
How
is
do
true.
you know?
You condition them.
Right.
They will know how you will respond.
and the next time they're probably not going to come at you that way because
Exactly.
they're going to figure, well, she's not going to or he's not going to react in a certain way.
Right.
So
Excellent. More than any generation in the past, our generation has seen much progress in the world. We have seen the world come closer. We have seen the man on the moon. Our age can be described as the computer age, space age, or technology age. Technology has brought the world together, changed us from being primitive to modern, and helped us to conquer our illnesses and enemies. In spite of this progress, one area where we have made the least progress is in the area of relationships. We are in the pits when it comes to relationships. Our forefathers probably did better. Family relationships were more important to them. At that time, it was okay for several nuclear families to be under the same roof. It was okay for sick, weak, and elderly to be under the same roof. We don't think like that anymore. We think in terms of what is best for ourselves. We are more concerned about our rights as individuals than anything else. Relationships have moved from simple bonds of love to bonds of legal rights. Our problems are settled in courts, a change from settling problems in the company of compassionate family members. Presently, we have more broken relationships than ever before. Not only are parents divorcing each other, but children and parents are terminating relationships with each other. So let's talk about issues, problematic issues that can come up that will break up relationships. So please jump in and let's have a time of discussion.
Well, I think one of the things that can break up a relationship is a lack of communication. I think that breaks down the relationship initially, and then other things can add to the mix. But the lack of the communication is really big in a relationship, because if you can't communicate with your partner,
Right.
they don't know how you're feeling.
Right.
You don't know how they're feeling unless they tell you.
Correct.
So I think that's a really big part of the breakdown of a relationship.
Okay. Let's talk about communication problems. In essence, we talk about verbal and non-verbal, right? Usually in a relationship, everything goes fine in the beginning. There's always that honeymoon period. But then after that, communication started breaking up. Now, what do you think are the issues? What is causing it?
Well, it could be that you think that, I think everybody's guilty of this, not just women, not just men, but the fact that you think that the other person knows what you're thinking.
Okay.
Like they can read your mind.
Right, right.
And it can't be done. I mean,
Right.
they don't know what's wrong unless you tell them. If they say, you know, if obviously they can read your body language and they can see that you're bothered by something and you say, I'm fine.
Right.
But you're really not fine. You just want them to figure it out on their own.
Correct.
They can't. You know,
Exactly.
you need to communicate to them and
Right.
tell them,
Right.
you know, I'm upset because you didn't put the socks in your drawer or whatever the issue is.
Okay.
You know, they don't know unless you tell them.
Right. I think that's a good point. I think maybe in the beginning, I mean, there was a lot more open communication, right? And then as time passes, like you said, they expect each other to be reading their feelings. It's like it's all written on their face or something, and being very passive. Okay, so the need for open communication, right? Okay, that's a very good point. I think lack of that causes problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Another reason why sometimes there's a lack of communication is because you're scared as to how that person's going to view you or what opinion they're going to have of what it is that you're going to tell them or how they're going to think of you after you express yourself. But sometimes they're thinking the same thing, and it's just a matter of bringing it to the table, and then you might find out that, you know, he or she's feeling exactly the same way and that you have something else in common, but no one's going to know unless you talk about it.
You have a good point there, Angeline. I think the fear element. You know, you're afraid, you know, how the other person will respond. That is true. And again, you don't want to make things worse. And so because of that fear, then you hold back. Okay, that's true.
And also you mentioned at the beginning that honeymoon period. Maybe
Yes.
during that honeymoon period, you spent a lot more time with that person.
Good point.
And then as time passes,
Right.
you know, maybe you get comfortable and you don't spend
take
as
it for
much time.
granted.
You take it for granted.
Right.
But really, you still need to bring back that honeymoon period once in a while.
Okay.
And be able to relive those, you know, those feelings of at the beginning kind of feelings.
Sure.
Of the beginning of the relationship.
Right.
Because
right.
that's what made it fun and interesting, and that's how you fell in love with the person.
Excellent.
So-
Excellent.
Well, I think that honeymoon phase, too, is there's not a lot of conflict because you've just met the person. It's like a growing period for both of you. You're both
Right.
growing to know each other, and
Right.
there's not a lot of conflict there because you don't really know that much about each other yet to have the conflict.
Right. Right.
So when a conflict does arise later on, then
Right.
that's when you have to learn about the
Right.
communication.
Right. You both brought up a very good point. I think the fact that we spend more time with the other person during the honeymoon period in itself helps communication, right? You know, based on this research, marital happiness is at its peak during the honeymoon period. But then it takes a downward trend and it hits the bottom when they have very small children and have too many chores to do, too many responsibilities, and that is when a lot of relationships break up. But then if they hang in there until their old age, it is said that that original happiness will come back.
Well, because you probably you've been through so much together. At that point, you probably look back and say, "Wow, you know, we
That's
made
true.
it this far."
That's true. And the other factor is that they will be spending more time with each other because once
right.
children are gone, you know, and during that emptiness stage, they have time for each other. So again, coming back to spending more time with each other, that also brings in happiness. And of course, initially it's all romantic love, and then at some point, companionate love takes over. And so they go back to the original peak of happiness.
Because I think in the beginning you're making each other your number one priority. You know, there aren't
Exactly.
as many girls' nights out or, you know, guys' night out. You're going to the movies together. You're going out to eat together. You're doing
Yeah.
everything together. And
Right.
then once it becomes more serious, well, then there's also the job. Now you have to fly out of town for a meeting, and so you go.
Sure.
Or once you have kids, well, then the children become the priority.
Right.
Or the in-laws become the priority,
Sure.
and you're not the priority with your partner anymore.
Right.
But I think it's important in a marriage like that, when you do have kids, to make your relationship a priority. I mean, the kids are obviously a priority, but I always believe that if you don't make your relationship and you don't feed the relationship and let it grow, even when you have young kids, that doesn't really set a great example for your kids, because then they grow up and they may not see the lovingness that you have for each other, but you're just so hectic, you know, at that point. You know, I think it's important that you work at that part of it too, at that part of the relationship, that you still have a date night, even when you have young kids. Because you need to nurture the relationship that the two of you have together too, as well.
True. That's true. Yeah, we're talking about priorities. That's true. I think as time goes, priorities change. And so just, you know, bringing back the honeymoon period is very important. That's true. That's true. What else? What are some other issues, problematic issues that can break up relationships?
Sometimes the baggage that the relationship comes with.
Okay.
For example, if your partner has been married before, you have to deal with the ex-wife, or if they have children, you know, you have to, now you're in a new relationship with someone else, but also come in the children if they have children.
Right.
And I think sometimes if you don't have that experience on your own, then it becomes more difficult.
Yes, yes.
To accept.
Sorry. And not just the children or the ex-wife, also the family.
Right.
The mother-in-law. And,
that's true.
You know, that's very important.
Right.
Sometimes you know, you don't get along with your mother-in-law, they don't like you.
Yes.
And that could cause a lot of conflicts.
Right.
Because, you know, that's still his family. And vice versa.
Right. So, good point. I think the baggage that we bring into the relationship, right? That's true. Emotional baggage. There may be other social, cultural.
Right, the culture.
Family. Okay.
The close-knit.
Yes, all of those.
Family.
Yes.
Versus the, you know, they don't care who you date or.
Okay, and also like this is how my parents used to do. This is what I used to do. This is how I used to do, and you know, those kind of preferences.
Right. I think maybe in accepting the differences, you have to remember that each human is totally an individual person, and there aren't two people who are exactly alike. So when you come into a relationship, you have to remember that you're going to have differences in opinions or different styles or manners of doing things, and instead of just always clashing with that person, accept it, you know, talk about it. It goes back to the communication. You know, you just have to sit down and talk about it and verbalize what it is that you're doing and how it is that you do things, or why it is that you do things a certain way, so that you can accept the other person's, you know, differences.
Okay.
And remember that you can't change the other person.
Yes.
That how they come is how they come, and that's how they're going to be. It's very difficult to change them. You may be able to modify it, but...
Right. I think you have a good point. People don't change that fast.
You can't change
That is
them.
true. That's true.
If anything, because you get more comfortable, whatever it is that's bothering you will get worse.
Right.
You know, and that does cause conflict.
Yes. Let's talk about solutions. What are some solutions? Again, this is something we can discuss for hours, but we'll talk about maybe a few things, you know, that people can do.
Well, I think because what we were talking about with the communication, one of the big solutions is learning how to communicate with your significant other or your partner.
Excellent.
Being able to feel like you can go to them.
Right.
I mean, here's a person that you share your life with. You share everything with this person, and it seems silly to think that you feel like you can't open up to them when you share everything with them.
Yes.
Except maybe this one particular issue that you have, or whatever it is that you don't communicate. So I think, and it's a learned process. I mean, you need to learn to communicate with your partner in a positive way.
Right.
Because you don't want to communicate with them attacking them, because that's going to make them shut down and become defensive.
Yeah.
And then the communication's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
So I think learning to communicate with them through a positive means, being open.
I like what you're saying, Liz. I think learning the basics of communication, isn't it? See, at one point in my life when I was doing my pre-doctoral internship, I was doing evaluations for the court. And I was evaluating couples who were sent by the court. And one thing that I learned was that most of them really missed the basics of communication. For example, taking turns, listening to each other. They didn't have those basic skills. So just learning the basics of communication, that is very important.
Well, it's also the statements that you use with them. I mean, a lot of times it's accusatory, like, you make me feel this way. You know, like instead of saying, when you do this, I feel this way.
Right.
You know, so that you can kind of, you're not attacking them, but you're saying, listen, when you approach something in this manner,
Yes.
this is how it makes me feel.
Excellent.
Because unless you tell them how the situation makes you feel,
Yes.
they may just say, well, she just doesn't like it because she doesn't like it.
Right.
They don't understand how it's affecting you internally,
Yes.
you know, how it could be hurting you.
That's true. That is true.
You can say, I'm feeling bothered because of this reason, or you know,
Right.
something like that, instead of just coming at them like you're the wrong person and you're doing,
Yes.
you know,
Yes. So not blaming.
right.
Right.
Yes, that is true.
So that way you're at least gearing them in towards, you know, seeing things
Right.
from your point of view.
Yes. What else?
I
We're
think
talking about solutions.
being flexible. You
Being
definitely
flexible.
have to be flexible and not
Very
expect
important.
things to just go one way. No, you have to leave room for, I don't want to say for failure, but for things to go wrong,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's a learning experience. And so
Right.
you have to be accepting and know that there's another person. So it's not only you. And, you know, just like we talked about with family, there's other people involved in this relationship.
Yeah.
So you have to be flexible and know that things aren't going to always be
Right.
perfect. They're not
Right.
always going to go your way.
Right.
Because if they are going to go your way, it's because you're by yourself. Now you're in a
Yes.
relationship. So
Yeah.
there are other things that you have to take into consideration.
I think that's a great point, because I think lack of flexibility and being rigid and being stubborn can really cause
Damage.
problems in the relationship.
And also using those mistakes and those conflicts to learn
Yes.
and grow.
Right. That's true.
Because you know, maybe you didn't know that you were doing this and that person felt that way, and from that conflict and communicating about it, you'll know for next time. So you've grown as
Right.
you know, and relationships have to grow.
I like that,
Or they
because a
should.
lot of times what happens is when something goes wrong, people immediately think of leaving. You know, the old fight or flight.
Right.
So they think of flight, you know, just leave. But your point is so good. I think learning from mistakes and growing. Excellent.
But it's a cycle. I mean, you could always. I always tell myself, this too shall pass. I mean,
This too shall pass,
It's
yes.
not. Your life isn't always going to be perfect. Your relationship isn't always going to be perfect. There's going to be peaks and there's going to be lows, and you just have to say in the low times that this too shall pass.
Yes.
You may need to work at it a little. I mean, it's not going to just pass on its own. But you know, this too shall pass.
This too shall pass,
and
that's
you'll
true.
get to reach a peak again.
That's true. That's well said. Anything else?
Well, relationships have to constantly be nurtured.
Be nurtured.
Part
Yes.
of nurturing them
Yeah.
is, you know, feeding them, and
Right.
you will have that. It's like a plant. If you
Exactly.
don't give it water, it's going to die. And,
Right.
But if you give it water, it'll revive.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
relationships
Yeah.
are the same way. You have to
Yeah.
nurture them and
Yeah.
and work with them. And
Right. Yeah.
like Lisa mentioned, they're going to be its low, going to have its lows and its peaks,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
you just have to stick with it the whole time.
Yeah. And a lot of repairs too, right?
Absolutely.
I think people are too quick to jump out. I think that's part of the reason the divorce rate is so high. Is
Exactly.
that people now, it's not like it was back then, where you not that you have to stay in an unhappy relationship. That shouldn't be it. But that you should at least put effort into trying to make it work. Not
That's
just
true.
say it doesn't work. That's it. I'm giving up.
Right.
You know, because you wouldn't do that with your job.
No.
I mean,
no.
you wouldn't do that with your child if
No.
you had children.
That's
so you need to treat the relationship as kindly as you would treat those things too.
Yes, that's true. From a spiritual angle, it is interesting to see how much importance Christ gave for relationship building experiences. It seems he spoke a lot about these relationship building experiences. Christ talked about reconciling with a brother before a sacrifice is brought to the altar, making up before the sun sets, forgiving the trespasses of others, walking extra miles, giving away your blanket to one who snatches away your jacket, turning the left cheek to those who hit on the right, loving your enemies, and so on. Very briefly, let me share with you 3 things that can build up relationships. Number 1, giving with sincere concern. This is giving with no intention of receiving. Some of your best friends could be people whom you loved and you cared for when you knew that they could not return the same gesture of goodwill. Number 2, ignore indifferences. If there are petty and insignificant differences, ignore them. as I shared with you earlier, it can be small things and small misunderstandings that develop enmity. We can counteract that by ignoring it and acting as if it never happened. Number 3, nurture relationships. If relationships are left unattended, they will become dry and barren. Occasional meals together, a visit or a phone call, a letter or a card, a gift or a small token that shows that you remembered your friend will nurture and build up the relationship. 4 things that can, however, break relationships are: number 1, competition; number 2, comparing; number 3, criticizing; and number 4, complaining. Relationships that engage in these behaviors will very likely run into problems.